Hello everyone, my name is Jane Catton and I'm the CEO at Agewell. I'd like to welcome you to our show today called Aging Matters. I'd also like to thank MVP Healthcare for their sponsorship of our program every month. As you may know, Agewell is the largest area agency on aging in the state of Vermont, and we serve clients who are over the age of 60 or under the age of 60 with a disability on long-term care Medicaid. Our mission is to make sure we wrap around services to our clients so that they can remain living healthy and independent lives in the setting of their choice. We also serve our clients in 4 counties across the state. That's Franklin, Grand Isle, Chittenden, and Addison. Every month on Aging Matters, we like to find topics that are really important and help us all to understand how to age well, because after all, we're all aging. This month, we have a very interesting topic that we're going to explore with a special guest, Derek Souza, who is a specialized care and service coordinator, case manager at Agewell. Derek is also the co-chair of the Hoarding Resource and Support Team in Chittenden County. So he has some really special expertise around this topic of hoarding disorder, which we're going to explore in more detail right now. Welcome, Derek. It's so nice to see you.
Thank you so much for having me today. I am very excited to talk about this topic, so thank you.
Well, we're lucky to have you. Derek, before we dive into our questions, maybe you could tell our viewers a little bit about what a specialized case manager does at Agewell and a little bit about your background.
Sure. So I have been a specialized case manager with Agewell for the past 4 years. We mainly focus on some more complex issues with aging, so mainly focus on older adults in states of self-neglect or experiencing hoarding, squalor, or those that are unhoused. I first got started with Agewell back in 2009 as an AmeriCorps, and I loved the work I was doing, and so now I'm a full case manager, and just very happy to be here and happy to the work I do every day. So.
Well, we're so lucky to have you as one of our specialized case managers because I know the work is incredibly complicated. It's very hard every day. So thank you for doing what you do. Derek, before we get into all of my questions, maybe we could set the stage just with this first one, and that is, can you help to define what a hoarding disorder is?
So I thought maybe we could start with the technical definition. So this is out of the DSM-5, or what we call the Manual of Mental Disorders. So hoarding is the persistent difficulty discarding or parting with possessions regardless of their actual value. So I think the most important thing that we're going to talk about today with hoarding is that it's very difficult to discard of those items, and the actual process of discarding can be very, very traumatic. And even though a lot of us can think that it's very easy just to throw out items, get rid of items, empty our houses, those that are experiencing hoarding disorder, that piece is very complicated and can be very problematic and traumatic if it's done very quickly. So,
wow.
I hope that gives a good overview for what we're talking about today.
A great definition. So that really helps to frame our conversation because I have done a little bit of research on this. So I was actually shocked when I read some of the literature and some studies that have been done on hoarding disorder. And it says it's estimated that hoarding disorders affect as much as 6% of the American population, and that is almost 19 million Americans. And many of the researchers note that these figures are underestimated, and a vast majority of hoarding remains unrecognized and untreated. So Derek, with those pretty compelling statistics, why do you think there's so much underrepresentation from individuals who are impacted by hoarding disorder?
So there are a lot of different reasons, but I think first, hoarding, there's a lot of stigma around hoarding, and I think it's a good time to talk about the term hoarder, and we really try to not use that word. It's very negative and can be very negative when you're talking about someone. So there's a big stigma around hoarding, and people can feel very ashamed of what their houses look like. And so, the more people collect and they will isolate more and more. And a lot of times people that are hoarding, will tend to close the blinds and things like that and just isolate themselves more and more. But another reason that people tend to not report is that people want to hold on to their items too, right? They're afraid of people coming in and doing deep cleans and removing all their items. So, it's very different than a lot of other maybe mental health disorders where people are seeking treatment. Hoarding, those are their things. They love their items. They love their belongings. And so, there can be a real trust issue with outsiders or family members that want to come in and get rid of those items. So you see a lot of isolation that way as well.
Oh, wow. And we also know from one of our other shows that social isolation affects older adults for a lot of reasons. And now it sounds like the hoarding disorder issue contributes to that as well. So that's really unfortunate. Derek, can you talk about how hoarding is different than collecting, clutter, or disorganization? And I'll just take a little sidebar here. You and I talked about this the other day a little bit, but for example, you could walk into my garage and you would find a tremendous amount of clutter. And if you spoke to my husband, he might say, "Oh, I really want to keep those things." And so, there's a line, I guess, a progression of, as you were saying, from these different means of collecting, creating clutter, then disorganization to hoarding disorder. So can you define a little bit about each of those?
Yeah, I think, as a case manager, I think a lot of people, we're not in the business to just say, oh, you can't have possessions, you have to have an empty space. People are allowed to, first off, have collections. People are allowed to be messy. We don't have to have extremely tidy houses. But where hoarding really steps in is that, first off, the relationship that one might have with something that we consider that doesn't have any value, for example, like paper cups or paper towel rolls, for that, they might have a very deep connection, and it might be very easy for us to write off, it's just a paper cup, throw it out, or plastic bins. Items like that we would find disposable or useless, there is a whole story of connections with that person. Other things, other types of collectibles and things like that, they're okay to have, but I think it's that real if I were to come to your house and say, maybe we have to get rid of these items, you'd be okay of saying, okay, let's go through them. But it's that I can't get rid of this because that item is actually part of myself, and you're kind of worried about where that item is going. And then the other thing, the main thing that we're always worried about is the fact that, is your collection overtaking other parts of your house, or is that clutter overtaking other parts of your house? And so, do you have so many things in your home that you're not able to cook anymore because you have your stovetop cluttered? Are you starting to store things in your bathtub, and so you're not able to shower anymore? Those types of uses of items in your home can be detrimental to one's health. And so, are your things getting in the way of your life? Can you no longer invite your family members? Can your grandkids no longer play in your house anymore? And then, the other thing are there fall risks and fire hazards. Those are a lot of things that we think about when we're thinking about hoarding and the difference between hoarding and collecting. So
Okay.
hope that answered.
Yes, that helps me to understand.
Yeah. So I know a lot of people are worried, and a lot of people say, like, oh, I'm a hoarder. I have a collection of trophies, or I have a collection of, stamps or coins. But it's okay to have collections, just as long as they're not taking over other parts of your life, right?
Right. And creating safety hazards, like you said. That's the thing we're worried about most. Safety, fire, being able to do activities of daily living, which is where those things start to change, I imagine.
Yes.
It's very interesting. There's another term out there that we didn't talk about just now. So the difference then between hoarding disorder or hoarding and squalor.
Perfect. So as a case manager from AgeWell, and especially as the specialized case managers, we go into homes. Maybe it's the first time we've seen a home, and it's tough to differentiate if it's something that's hoarding or squalor. Just real quick, squalor is when imagine you stop washing your dishes and kind of you just didn't want to wash them anymore. And what would that look like after a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month? And every time you ate, things just kind of fell on the floor and things like that. It looks very messy, but that person doesn't have a real connection with those things. If we wanted to come in and say, hey, let's get this cleaned up, the person will be okay with cleaning that up. Hoarding can look similar sometimes to squalor, sometimes it doesn't. But the emotional connection with those things, whatever it may be, newspapers on the floor, mail on the floor, maybe tissues, something like that, old newspapers, there is an emotional connection. And if I were to come in and say, all right, I'm bringing all these out to the garbage, there could be some kind of break with that person or a lack of trust or something, it could be very catastrophic. So hoarding doesn't always have to be something messy.
Right.
It can be piles of boxes that are organized, but squalor is always that kind of very dirty, unsafe, unsanitary home.
And I imagine with all your experience, you can go into these different settings and figure out pretty quickly which is which.
Yeah, it takes a little bit of testing, and we're person-centered, and so it's a lot of motivational interviewing and speaking to our clients and understanding what's happening, what's their relationship with their things. So we always want to listen first and then act second. So.
Oh yeah, that's a wonderful approach. Derek, tell us, is hoarding more common among older individuals versus the general population, or is it pretty equal across the board?
Yeah, it's a tough one to say. I think we tend to see more older Vermonters having issues with hoarding. But I do want to break this idea that people are hoarding because there's this Great Depression mentality. We're past that already, and people are still having issues with hoarding. And I think hoarding can happen to anybody. But what we see with our population, the older Vermonters, is that I think decluttering is a very difficult process. Boxes are very heavy, and sometimes there's just not the physical ability to lift boxes, take things out of their home. So, sometimes they need an extra hand. And another big issue I think we see more with the older population is that, and it's very challenging, but when a loved one passes away, when their spouse passes away, a lot of times they'll stay. They want to keep those items, and it can be really tough to let go of those items because you love that person. They've lived with you your whole life. And a lot of our, when children move out too, that your kids can leave all your items in your home, and you want to keep them as well because they might come back at some point, or you might be holding on to them. So we tend to see that more with the older population.
Right. I tend to have some of that furniture from my children too. That's in one of my rooms downstairs. But those again are just really important differentiations, and I think I can relate to the stories you're telling, certainly about people who may have been living in their homes for a long period of time, and it just, it's kind of exhausting to think about how you have to declutter and do the job, right?
A lot of work.
So it is a lot of work, absolutely. Derek, can you talk a bit more? Earlier we were alluding to social isolation as it relates to hoarding disorder, but the impact of social isolation on those individuals who are affected by hoarding disorder. What do you see?
Yeah, well, especially with the pandemic, there was a period of time where we weren't doing home visits, and so there was a lot of my clients that we weren't able to see, and some of the collections and the clutter built up, and they love their possessions, but at the same time, there's shame involved in all of that, and so the bigger the collections and the clutter build, the more they experience isolation. And so, those weekly visits from their grandkids may not be happening anymore because the house is not safe. They don't want them in there. There might not be any places to sit anymore.
True.
And so they just tend, there's a terminology we use, we call it a cockpit. And you imagine like in a jet or a plane where you kind of just create this wall around maybe a recliner or a sofa, and you put everything kind of there, and you kind of build these walls around you. And so even in your own home, you start to even sink in and isolate yourself within the home. So and then it's just a lack of not wanting to go out, and then a lot of embarrassment. A lot of people like to call you like a pack rat or a slob or something like that, and so people are very hesitant to have you come in. The blinds are drawn, and so and that's exactly the opposite of what I think a lot of people want. And they just need somebody to come in and not to shame them and not to say, oh, this place is filthy, this place is a dump. That's the exact opposite we need when you're working with a family member or a friend that's experiencing hoarding, right?
Right.
I always say, like what I said before, first listen and then take action and understand what's happening.
Right. So this is probably a great segue into my next question, because you just alluded to sort of the world shrinking and things becoming more and more isolated, and that hoarding behaviors don't just affect the individual, but their loved ones too. So I can imagine it's very challenging for the loved ones to understand how to help. And so, for example, would it be harmful for that loved one to go in and I think you mentioned this, demand that they get rid of their things, dispose of them without their permission, just get it done because they care for their loved one?
Yeah, I know, it can be very frustrating for family members to come in. You want to, you're worried about that person. You don't want them to fall, have a fire. There's so many risks. Or even if you need to call the EMTs to make sure there's enough space for fire and rescue to get in with a stretcher if need be. So yes, my recommendation always is to start small. When you go in and you want to just deep clean and get rid of everything, it can be really overwhelming and traumatic. A lot of times when we see, these deep cleans, people can tend to relapse, and apartments or homes can be filled up in a matter of months again. It really takes the individual to understand what's happening and for them to start, right? It really takes them to take that small step forward. So always small steps is our key in hoarding intervention. Hoarding intervention is very slow, and it can be very monotonous, and it can be, a lot of repetition. There's a program out there, Hoarders, maybe some people have seen, and
sure.
it is TV, and there's some action and drama to it all the time, and so that process of these giant deep cleans can be very traumatic, and so we really want people to take time and patience to work with the individual and have the individual do a lot of work themselves.
Right, because it's about learning new things about how to manage their space in their life, and I imagine it takes a lot of patience.
Yes,
a lot of patience. Oh my goodness. So, Derek, how does AgeWell, you've talked a little bit about your role as a specialized case manager, but how does AgeWell support families, individuals, and caregivers to address the needs of someone who is affected by hoarding disorder and clutter, any of the spectrum, if you will?
So first, we are, as case managers, we might be the first ones to be there to talk with that individual. And we are there to create a relationship of trust and to connect our clients or these individuals with different types of assistance that may be out there. So for example, making referrals to the Hoarding Resource and Support Team of Chittenden County to get different strategies. We have an example where the woman had a lot of items and we couldn't get to the furnace in the house, and the furnace had broken. And so, working with ourselves from AgeWell and CVOEO and other agencies like Champlain Housing Trust or Burlington Housing Authority, we were able to declutter the home, get to the furnace, have the furnace replaced and worked. And, our goal always is to have seniors age in place. And so it takes, and that's what we're there for, is to make that bridge and make those connections for people.
And have some great community partners to work with too.
Great community partners.
That's how we glue it all together. It sounds very challenging but rewarding at the same time.
And I was going to say real quick, there is we also do workshops called Buried in Treasures, which is a let's say quote unquote self-help group. It's peer led, and it's for people. It's a great book for people to get over their issues with their belongings. And there's homework assignments and, a lot of reading and material about it. So, and we will facilitate those at AgeWell from time to time.
And I've heard that when we have held those at AgeWell, it's like a sellout situation.
They do. And the great thing is after the facilitator from AgeWell is done, those groups continue to meet on their own. And so that's a great peer support.
Oh, that's fantastic. So, as we've talked about what AgeWell can offer, the similar resources available throughout Vermont.
Yes, we, as there are AAAs and are great AAAs, but also we are trying to start more and more hoarding resource and support teams. So there is a task force. It's bed bugs and hoarding in Northeast Kingdom, and Washington County is also starting a hoarding and resource and support team. So we are hoping that more and more will pop up across the state. So if anybody is looking to start any out there, please do, because they really pull in great teams and great community partners together.
And it sounds like you're a great person for them to reach out to
They
as
can
well.
reach out to me, yes.
That's fantastic. So, Derek, one of my last questions for you. We always like to think about these interventions and the resources and the supports. Do you have any success stories you'd like to tell us about?
Right now with the housing crisis and everything, I think anytime we can keep a senior in their home, that's what I really, work for every day. And there are many times where we have been successful. And, a lot of the clients I work with have done and started to do the work themselves. There's a lot of help, and we're there to help to intervene and do interventions and things like that. But, what really is successful for me is when people understand and they start doing those little things every day. And a lot of times with my clients, I say, if you could do 10 minutes a day and get rid of that, just one item, that's all that's great. And it's like running a marathon, right? You can't just go out and run a marathon tomorrow. You can't just deep clean your house, in one day. But if you start little by little and it may look small, but just removing that one item and then growing and growing and growing, that's success for me. So
that's awesome. It's about the long haul and taking baby steps, right?
Exactly.
The baby steps.
Baby steps are the most important.
Derek, I want to thank you. Your presentation, your information, all the resources that you've offered us have been fantastic, and I know that our viewers really appreciate what you do as well. So to our viewers, if you believe that hoarding has affected your life or someone that is close to you or a loved one, please know that there are resources out there available to you. Our community agencies AgeWell is here to help, as are many other services in Chittenden County and across all of our service areas. So again, I always like to end with just our helpline number, because that is a number you can call if you do need to reach out for assistance. And that number is 1-800-642-5119. And anyone who needs help can just pick up the phone, dial that number, and get to our team at AgeWell, and we're here to help. So thank you again for joining us on Aging Matters. Next time, we'll have another really interesting topic to share with you all. I look forward to it. Take care, and thank you.